They came to conquer Earth and crush humanity under their boot heels. The Vidian armada filled the skies, 1,000 warships strong, led by Supreme Commander Solaris herself. Against such overwhelming force, the human race should have buckled and submitted, like so many civilizations before them. But as the Vidians would soon learn, humans don't bend the knee. They bite back. Earth's defense fleet was a ragtag assembly of outdated frigates, repurposed freighters, and barely tested prototypes, crewed by green recruits and grizzled veterans alike. By all rights, they should have been swatted aside like gnats. Yet with tactics bordering on suicidal insanity, Admiral David Howard turned the tide. His first shocking victory came at Titan when his flagship Essex crippled Solaris's dreadnought, buying precious time to evacuate Earth's colonies. Bloodied and furious, Solaris agreed to a ceasefire, sending envoys to force humanity's surrender at the negotiating table. But as the Vidian battle fleets loomed over Luna Base, Earth's delegates simply folded their arms and refused to submit. Humans would go down fighting, even in the face of annihilation. Santos, the UN Secretary General, saw one last desperate chance for survival. He would hear Solaris's demands. But the battlegrounds changed when a Vidian guard tried to assassinate Admiral Howard, hero of the resistance. Confronted with proof of her treachery, Solaris revealed the true face of her empire. Not a benevolent federation, but a brutal regime ruling through oppression and fear. She'd hoped that cutting off humanity's head would force them to kneel at last. Her mistake. Santos's response was to broadcast news of the Vidians' betrayal across the galaxy, declaring humanity's refusal to bow before tyrants. A spark of defiance, long dormant, ignited within the Vidian slave races. Whispers became protests, protests became uprisings, and the Vidian fleet found itself beset by rebellion. Earth had one last hope, a decapitation strike at the heart of the Vidian Empire. Admiral Howard would lead a desperate charge into the enemy's lair, carrying the banner of freedom, rallying the downtrodden to rise up and shatter their chains. The light of liberty was coming, to a galaxy too long lost in shadow, and it would be humanity who brought the dawn. The Terran Expeditionary Force streaked through hyperspace, 1,000 ships strong, united in purpose and tenacity. At their head, the battered but unbroken Essex led the charge, her scars a testament to the battles she had endured. On her bridge, Admiral David Howard stood tall, his eyes fixed on the viewing screen as the swirling vortex of hyperspace parted to reveal their target, Arcturon. The fortified system hung before them like a jeweled spider's web, its defensive platforms overflowing with guns and shielded by interlocking force fields. Vidian warships swarmed from the central hub, a lethal swarm ready to engulf the invaders. Yet they hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of Howard's fleet. "All ships engage at will," Howard ordered, his voice steady as a mountain. "Let's show these bastards what freedom looks like." The rebel ships surged forward, a motley assortment of vessels from a dozen races united in defiance. Krogan battle cruisers, their hulls adorned with the scars of 100 campaigns, charged into the fray with bellowed war cries. Zixani hive ships, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent light, disgorged swarms of fighter drones to harass the Vidian formations. Arcturon's defenses opened fire, filling space with searing beams of plasma and arcing bolts of antimatter. The Essex shuddered as her shields absorbed a glancing blow, alarms blaring across the bridge. Howard gripped the command console, his knuckles tightening. "Concentrate fire on those defense platforms," he barked. "We need to punch a hole in their perimeter." The rebel ships responded with a storm of missiles and torpedoes, saturating Arcturon's shields with a relentless barrage. The Vidians fought back with desperate ferocity, their ships ramming rebel vessels in suicidal charges. A destroyer, trailing plasma from a ruptured engine, bore down on the Essex like a spear. "Brace for impact!" Howard roared. The destroyer slammed into the Essex's shields, its reactor overloading in a blinding flash. The flagship reeled, her hull groaning under the strain. Consoles exploded across the bridge, showering the crew with sparks and shrapnel. Howard was flung from his feet, slamming into a bulkhead with bone-crushing force. For a moment he lay stunned, his vision swimming. The cries of the wounded and the wail of alarms filled his ears. Gritting his teeth, he hauled himself upright, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Damage report," he growled. "Shields down to 20%, his tactical officer reported, her voice strained. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, weapons at half capacity." Howard stared at the viewing screen, watching as the rebel ships clashed with the Vidian forces in a deadly dance. They were taking losses, but they were giving as good as they got. The Vidian lines were starting to buckle. "Signal all ships," Howard said, his voice ringing with iron perseverance. "Concentrate fire on their flagship. We end this now." The rebel ships surged forward, their weapons blazing. The Vidian flagship, a monstrous dreadnought overflowing with guns, loomed before them like a colossus. Its shields flared and flickered under the onslaught, then collapsed with a blinding flash. "Ramming speed," Howard ordered, his eyes hard as flint. "All hands, brace for impact." The Essex leapt forward, her engines howling. The dreadnought filled the viewing screen, growing larger with each passing second. Howard gritted his teeth, his heart hammering in his chest. The impact was like the hand of a god. The Essex plowed into the dreadnought's hull, crumpling armor and crushing bulkheads. The rebel ship shuddered and groaned, her frame straining under the forces tearing at her. But she held together, her reinforced prow smashing deep into the Vidian vessel's guts. For a moment, the two ships hung locked together, a titanic sculpture of twisted metal. Then, with a flash of light that seared the eyes, the dreadnought's reactor went critical. A sun bloomed in the heart of Arcturus, consuming the Vidian flagship in an inferno of plasma and radiation. Cheers erupted across the rebel fleet as the Vidian ships scattered, their formation broken. The defense platforms fell silent, their crews abandoning their posts in a panic. Arcturus, the impregnable fortress, had fallen. Howard sagged back in his command chair, his uniform stained with sweat and blood. They had won the day, but at a cost. The Essex was a wreck, her decks littered with the dead and dying. And this was just the beginning. "Stand down from battle stations," he said wearily. "Get me a damage report and start triaging the wounded. And somebody get a message out to the rest of the rebellion. Tell them Arcturus is ours, and the Vidians are next." As the bridge crew scrambled to obey, Howard closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. The battle was won, but the war stretched before them, a bloody path paved with sacrifice and sorrow. Yet in that moment, with the light of victory still burning in his heart, he knew one thing with crystal clarity. The Vidian Empire's days were numbered, and humanity would be the ones to bring them down. The victorious cheers aboard the Essex faded as quickly as they had begun. Admiral Howard's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display, watching the remnants of the Vidian fleet scatter like leaves in a storm. It wasn't enough, not by a long shot. "Set course for Empyrean," he ordered, his voice hoarse from shouting commands. "We press on while they're disorganized." As the rebel fleet surged forward, reports flooded in of increasing resistance. General Krutax's loyalist armada emerged from the shadows of gas giants and asteroid fields, harrying the rebels at every turn. Howard gritted his teeth, watching good ships and better people die with each engagement. In the midst of the chaos, Grax, Howard's Zixani intelligence officer, slithered onto the bridge. His compound eyes glittered with excitement. "Admiral," he chittered, "we've intercepted something big. A supply convoy heading for Empyrean. If we can hit it—" Howard nodded sharply. "Do it. Take whatever ships you need." The raid was swift and brutal. Grax's strike team tore through the convoy's meager defenses, capturing vital intelligence in the process. When they returned, Grax's normally blue scales had paled to a sickly gray. "It's worse than we thought," he reported, his voice trembling. "Emperor Dranthor is building something called the Galaxy Eater, a superweapon capable of destroying entire planets." A hush fell over the bridge. Howard's fists clenched at his sides. Before he could respond, a new voice cut through the silence. "I might be able to help with that." All eyes turned to Lyria, the Vidian defector who had joined their cause. Her silver eyes were hard as she continued. I was once betrothed to Dranthor's son, Prince Zardex. Before I fled the court, I saw his growing disillusionment with his father's tyranny. If we could reach him, turn him to our side. Howard frowned. It's risky. We'd be sending you into the heart of enemy territory. Lyria lifted her chin. I'm willing to take that risk, Admiral. For the rebellion. For freedom. After a moment's hesitation, Howard nodded. Assemble a small team. You leave at once. As Lyria's infiltration team departed, the rebel fleet pushed ever closer to Empyrean. The battles grew fiercer, the casualties mounting. Then, without warning, every communication channel erupted with panicked screams. By the gods, Howard's communications officer whispered. They've done it. They've used the Galaxy Eater. The tactical display showed the Kroyon colony world, home to billions, simply wink out of existence. In an instant, an entire civilization had been erased. Rage and perseverance swept through the rebel fleet. Ship captains clamored for vengeance, demanding an immediate assault on Empyrean. Howard raised a hand, calling for silence. We will have justice, he promised, his voice steely. But we do this smart. We do this right. Days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Then, just as the fleet was readying for their final push, a coded transmission came through. It was Lyria. We've made contact with Prince Zardex, she reported, her voice tight with tension. He's agreed to help us disable the planetary defenses. We're moving to... The transmission cut off abruptly. Howard leaned forward, his heart racing. Lyria! Lyria, come in! Silence reigned for long, agonizing minutes. Then a new transmission. Not from Lyria, but from Emperor Dranthor himself. The Vidian tyrant's face filled the view screen, his eyes glittering with malice. Rebels, he sneered, your pathetic infiltration attempt has failed. My traitorous son lies in chains, awaiting execution. Surrender now or watch him die before your eyes. Howard's mind raced. It was clearly a trap, but the stakes were too high to ignore. He squared his shoulders and met Dranthor's gaze. I'll come, he said firmly, but only to parley, face to face on your flagship. Dranthor's lip curled in a cruel smile. Very well, Admiral. I look forward to accepting your surrender in person. As the transmission cut off, Howard turned to his crew. Prepare a shuttle, he ordered, and alert all ships. The moment I give the signal, we attack with everything we've got. The Essex's shuttle bay opened, revealing the looming bulk of the Invictus, Dranthor's monstrous flagship. Howard took a deep breath, straightened his uniform, and stepped into the unknown. Howard stepped onto the Invictus, his boots echoing on the polished deck. Vidian guards flanked him, their weapons trained on his every move. The air thrummed with tension as he was escorted to the bridge. Emperor Dranthor lounged on an ornate command throne, his eyes glittering with malice. Ah, the great Admiral Howard, he sneered. Come to beg for mercy? Howard's gaze swept the bridge, taking in the tactical displays, the nervous officers, and the bound form of Prince Zardex kneeling before his father. Lyria stood nearby, her silver eyes wide with fear and hope. I've come to end this war, Howard said firmly, one way or another. Dranthor's laugh was cold and brittle. And how do you propose to do that, human? Your fleet is outnumbered. Your spies are captured. The Galaxy Eater stands ready to obliterate your pathetic rebellion. Howard's hand inched towards his concealed sidearm. You're right about one thing, Dranthor. This ends now. In a blur of motion, Howard drew his weapon and fired. The Emperor's shields flared, absorbing the blast, but the distraction was all Zardex needed. The prince surged to his feet, snapping his restraints and tackling his father from the throne. Chaos erupted on the bridge. Lyria sprang into action, disarming the nearest guard and tossing Howard a spare weapon. Alarms blared as the rebel fleet, acting on Howard's prearranged signal, launched their all-out assault on the Invictus. Howard fought his way to the main control console, fingers flying over the alien interface. Lyria, he shouted over the din of battle. I need the command codes. She vaulted over a fallen officer, landing beside him. Here! Her hands joined his, inputting a complex sequence of glyphs. The ship shuddered as rebel fire pounded its shields. On the main view screen, Howard watched his fleet tear into the Vidian formation. The Essex led the charge, her guns blazing. A scream of rage drew Howard's attention. Dranthor had gained the upper hand, pinning Zardex to the deck. The Emperor's hand closed around his son's throat. Howard raised his weapon, but Lyria was faster. Her stolen blaster whined, and Dranthor slumped forward, a smoking hole in his back. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Zardex struggled to his feet, his eyes wide with shock and something like relief. It's over, he rasped. After all these years, it's finally over. Howard nodded grimly. Not quite. He turned back to the console, entering the final command sequence. Throughout the Invictus, blast doors slammed shut, sealing off sections of the ship. We've taken control of the flagship, but Empyrean still stands, and the Galaxy Eater is out there waiting to be unleashed. Lyria's face hardened with purpose. Then we take the fight to the ground. We free my people, all the enslaved races. We end this, once and for all. Howard opened a channel to the rebel fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Howard. The Invictus is secure. Prepare for planetary assault. Today, we liberate Empyrean. As the rebel ships moved into formation, Howard stared out at the gleaming world below. The real battle, he knew, was just beginning. But with the tide finally turning, with hope blazing in the hearts of billions, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Empyrean awaited, and this time they would not fail. The liberation of Empyrean marked a turning point, but true peace remained elusive. Months passed, and the newly formed Galactic Council found itself mired in ceaseless debates and power struggles. Admiral Howard stood before the council chamber, his shoulders heavy with the weight of countless difficult decisions. The Kroyon representative, a hulking figure with mottled green skin, slammed a fist on the table. We demand justice, he roared. The Vidian war criminals must pay for their atrocities. Across the room, the Zixani delegate raised her delicate insectoid limbs in a placating gesture. Violence begets violence. We must show mercy if we hope to heal. Howard raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. We cannot move forward if we're constantly looking back. Our focus must be on rebuilding. A deafening explosion rocked the chamber. Alarms blared as smoke billowed through shattered windows. Howard's combat instincts kicked in, and he dove for cover, pulling the nearest delegates with him. Black Talon! Someone screamed. Chaos erupted as security forces rushed in, exchanging fire with shadowy figures retreating through the debris. Howard's eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of a familiar face among the attackers. General Krutax, the Vidian commander he'd believed dead. As the smoke cleared, Howard's blood ran cold. Grax lay motionless on the floor, blue ichor seeping from a grievous wound. Howard knelt beside his friend, desperately trying to stem the bleeding. Grax's compound eyes flickered weakly. Howard, he rasped, the weapon, Ixaran, you must... The Zixani's words trailed off as he slipped into unconsciousness. Medics rushed forward, whisking Grax away on a hovering stretcher. Hours later, Howard paced the deck of his flagship, the Essex. Lyria's hologram flickered before him, her silver eyes filled with concern. We've traced the attack to a hidden base on Shorin 5, she reported. Our intelligence suggests they're developing some kind of bioweapon. Howard's fist tight. The Ixaran plague. Grax tried to warn us. The council is divided, Lyria continued. Many fear retaliation will only escalate the conflict. Howard's fist tightened. We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, billions could die. The mission to Shorin 5 was a nightmare from the start. Howard led a strike team into the heart of the Black Talon's research facility, only to find it deserted and rigged with traps. As they pushed deeper into the complex, a sickly mist began to seep from the ventilation shafts. Gas! Howard shouted, fumbling for his rebreather. But it was too late. The noxious vapor seeped through the seals of their suits, burning their lungs and skin. One by one, Howard watched his team fall. Their flesh twisted and bubbled, warping into grotesque new forms. Howard fought the creeping dread as he felt the changes begin within his own body. With trembling hands, he activated his emergency beacon and staggered towards the exit. As his vision blurred and his limbs grew weak, one thought burned in his mind. He had to warn the others. He had to stop Thal Ranas before it was too late. The Essex's sensors picked up Howard's distress signal, but by the time they reached him, his ship was already spiraling out of control. It crashed on the desolate world of Tyrannus, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Howard dragged himself from the wreckage, his body racked with pain. He knew he was dying, the plague eating away at him from the inside. With the last of his strength, he activated his comms unit. "Lyria," he wheezed, "I'm sorry. I failed. The plague, it's worse than we imagined. You have to stop Thal Ranas. You have to—" A shadow fell across him. Howard looked up, his fading vision barely able to make out a familiar face. "Zardex?" he croaked in disbelief. The former Vidian prince nodded grimly. "We don't have much time, Admiral. I know how to stop the plague, but the cost, it may be more than you're willing to pay." As consciousness slipped away, Howard realized that his greatest battle was only just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.